5 o'clock. You read me? I'll be back in the office in an hour.
Ours is an environment that has been perfectly constructed to produce the outcome that you see. And the outcome that we see is one of the least healthy generations of Americans ever.
Mostly we're, living in cities and suburbs, and, we're driving our cars around and living in these boxes that are sort of designed to cut us off as much as possible from the environment around us.
No, I said 5 o'clock. It's got to be by 5 o'clock. Don't call back.
So I think another concern about our aging well or not is we've become really disconnected from the rhythms of nature. And part of our focus has been on increased productivity or earning a better income or just driving to stay connected. And we have longer work hours and we take fewer vacations. And now we have our electronic devices, so we're tracking how many people like our Facebook post or our Twitter feed.
I think most people now spend too much time texting, on a cell phone. They're just not present. I mean, for people to go now on a walk in the woods without cell service, for a lot of people, that's a foreign experience, and I think that's frightening.
The average person just assumes that will be their experience of living. As they get older, they're going to be sicker, they're going to have less fun, they're going to have less energy.
I think food has a big role in it. I mean, I think if you look around in the natural world, what every kind of organism shares is that they have to find their sustenance from the environment around them.
So the point that I'm trying to make is that, again, it took 2 million years to build, such an unbelievable machine like a Maserati. And was built to have super gasoline in the tank. And now we pretend to put water, and now we're wondering why the car doesn't perform or is broken.
Most Americans have a pretty good quality of life till they hit their 20s and 30s and they have this decline. We're the only mammal on the planet that experiences that trajectory. Most people that I interact with still very much think that what their parents had, they've inherited, and that inheritance is locked in a way that ultimately you have little control over. The perceptual landscape is one that tends to suggest little, if any, potential to transform your life.
Even though I've been here a little bit over half my life, my childhood and teenage years was spent in England, in the south of England, in a pretty rural, a small village called Forest Row. It's in Sussex. I had a very simple childhood. My dad was a teacher, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I'm the eldest of 4. We always had a garden. But yeah, we basically lived a very sort of kind of protected but country life. We lived about 10 minutes from my maternal grandparents, and they featured very strongly in our lives. And my grandma was a wonderful gardener. She always had vegetables. She just had this way of taking me out as a child into the garden and making it seem very magical and wonderful. So she's definitely a huge influence in my life and was a great cook. And she would always put whatever was left over from the roast would go into a pot and she would make broth, and that smell, particularly in her house, was a smell that I associate with the house. I think things like making broth, I'm a real advocate for, people say to me, well, why don't you just start your own broth business and sell it? You can get so much money selling it. And I'm like, for me, that's great. And there are people doing that, and they're charging, in my opinion, way too much for it. But really, truthfully, I'd like to teach people to make it. It's so easy. There's some really sick people. There's a majority of people, in this country are not well, and it's time to get out there and heal people.
My journey's been one that I would have never predicted. It's part of that mystery of life. So I'm a traditionally trained nephrologist, kidney specialist. I trained at Mass General Hospital, and I spent most of really the first half of my professional life doing that, and loving, what I did in that capacity. And then a horrible sort of coincidence happened. Both my parents developed kidney failure and ended up on dialysis. They suffered terribly, and they died at young ages. And it was an epiphany for me. A lot of what they went through was preventable. They didn't get a lot of help with nutrition. At that time in my life, I began to realize I needed to think differently.
So I'm an internal medicine doc, and just at the time that I was coming to the University of Iowa in the VA, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on the basis of weakness of my left leg and a prior history of dimness of the left eye. Like many physicians, when you're first diagnosed, you do all this reading, and it was very upsetting because MS is a progressive disease. Within 3 years, I had converted to secondary progressive MS. Now, in that stage, there's no more spontaneous improvement. You expect just a steady decline. At the very end of the year, I had this new aha moment, like, I should focus on what is it that my brain needs and redesign my diet very specifically to get the nutrition that I'm taking in supplement form from my food. And that's when the magic happens.
I had to learn all of the things that a good American medical education did not provide me. I went on to get training in many of these other disciplines. I began applying them in my own life, and I began to see my own life shift.
So at 3 months, my brain fog is gone, my energy's up. I'm in this new clinic, and actually, I can do the work. I can see these patients. I'm not exhausted. And at 9 months, I decided I'm going to go for a bike ride. My family's sort of freaked out. We're having this big family meeting. And my kids are upset. They're afraid because I haven't biked in 6 years. And Jackie says, okay, let's give it a try. And she has my son jog on the left, my daughter on the right. She's behind on the bike. She waits for the all clear. And then I push off. And I make it. I can pedal around the block.
I just don't write prescriptions anymore. I look at lifestyle, and most of the people who come to me are people who've kind of hit the wall. They've had the best of what our traditional models can offer, but they've only been able to move so far in those models. What my parents went through really changed the way that I think about who I am and how I serve others, and I'm grateful for that journey.
Had this not happened, I would still be a conventional academic doc thinking the newest drugs, latest surgery was where everything's at, as opposed to a doc that understands what really matters is the quality of the diet that my patients are eating, their environmental exposures to chemicals, their social network, their stress management practices, their daily movement. That is the root of health.
I think people have unfortunately focused on the potentially pathogenic microbes on the farm, right? E. coli, salmonella. But, if you look at things from a 30,000-foot level, this is a sea of beneficial microbes. You have everything here you could ever imagine. And whether you're petting an animal or you're drinking the raw milk of an animal, you're acquiring this just an incredible amount of microbial diversity from that exposure. And the other thing that's important is with cows, they need a really high volume of roughage because the microbes in the ruminant's digestive tract it's like the gold standard. I mean, you're not going to find a better example in biology of where an animal can convert fiber to short-chain fatty acids or fats. I mean, that cow is on a fat-based diet for the most part. And, people find that hard to believe because they look at the hay and they're thinking fiber and carbohydrates, but it's mostly fiber, and they really need that. And all the microbes in some of the distal chambers of their digestive tract are going to convert all that fiber to fat. So before it gets absorbed into their system. So it's an incredible model for the ultimate in the microbiome. Yeah, that's a really healthy looking poop right there.
Who knew our poop could be so valuable? That the microbiome, the bacteria living in our bowels, have 9 million genes. You know, we've got, 25,000 at most, and our bacteria have 9 million. And those 9 million genes help us run the chemistry of life.
We also have this incredible microbiome that lives in the gut, which is all different kinds of organisms, from bacteria to viruses to fungi, to you name it, that populate the gut and make up about 3 to 5 pounds of our body weight. These organisms are regulating our immune systems because they're in constant conversation with our body and with our brain.
I've been studying for many, many years, how microbes interact with us and in which terms we have this crosstalk. And, the only thing that we have been able to do until the recent past is to study specifically these microbes that we can cultivate. So in other words, that can be physically, seen on a petri dish or under the microscope. And only recently, thanks to technologies that we didn't have available before, we realized that we're looking at 5% of what is the wealth of microorganisms that we coexist. We are whatever we are because we are the component of us and this wealth of ecosystem that live with us. And, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at the video that has for each cell another 10 microorganisms that are coexisting and cohabiting there.
So most traditional docs like myself, and I had really good training, you're taught to think about human biology as distinct systems that have these autonomous effects on human health. We now see them as tightly integrated systems, and the gut and the brain, the nervous system, as it turns out, are really one shared integrated organ.
It's a very integrated system, and so the way that I treat people is actually to look at their gut, to assess their microbiome, to look how that's connected to their immune system and their brain, and that's the only way that I'm able to really help people with very complex neurological problems. What's funny is that one of my colleagues that I work with said, I went into neurology because I don't want to think about the other end. And I was like, I don't know how you can help people then, because really to look at complex issues, it's true that all health does begin in the gut.
We knew for a long time that there was a crosstalk between the brain and the gut. As a matter of fact, when you're stressed out or nervous, you can have stomachache, or you can, have, bowel movements, changes, and so on and so forth. What we didn't know, and now it's really flourishing science, that this is a two-way communication. The gut can communicate with the brain.
For people who have issues with depression or anxiety, all you really have to do is take a look at some of the most basic research on things like yogurt and on fermented foods. There's an interesting study that was done at UCLA where women were given yogurt for 2 or 3 weeks, and they had remarkably favorable improvements in their outlook on things, less anxiety when they were presented stressful pictures and photographs. So I think there's unequivocal evidence that the gut has an enormous control over the mind, and maybe vice versa.
The organisms in our gut can help boost our cognition, help us feel happier and less anxious, help us sleep better. So probably in the future, we're going to really be seeing a whole new category of treatments that are going to...
When I moved up here 2.5 years ago, actually before I moved up here, I connected to Leslie and Derek, who are the house managers, and I basically worked with them a little bit when they came down to Camp Hill and helped them. They were very interested in nutrition. They came to a conference, they did my workshop on fermentation, and they were really interested, and they really wanted that to be a big part of what High Spirit would be that the young people, that the young residents there would eat well, but that they would be part of cooking their own food and sourcing their own food. So they have grown a beautiful garden, and I've gone in there to help them menu plan and cook with the youngsters. The premise really is that all disease begins in the gut, which Hippocrates said back in ancient times, the father of medicine, and that food really is our medicine, and look to food as the medicine. And of course, we've got so far away from that I think, that's what we're sort of pulling back to. So for me, it was really a discovery of this sort of method of cooking that helped me, heal, and got me very excited and wanting to share that with others. Nothing compares with coming into somebody's kitchen, or me going into somebody else's kitchen, ideally, into their kitchen, because it's where they are, and teaching them. And that's really my goal in these next years. Really, my teaching has always just been in the doing it with others and the conversation that transpires between people. So what's new? What did you do yesterday? What did you do? Unpacked. You unpacked? So are you all moved in? Oh, that's awesome. Do you like the new house? You do? Good, good. That's great. Doctors are they're gonna have to get on board, and they're gonna have to start looking at nutrition again. I mean, the crazy thing in medicine is when you train to be a doctor, your nutrition education is sparse, to say the least. You don't get a whole lot on that, whereas it's like the whole thing,
So our bodies, in the same way that our bodies crave diverse microorganisms and that constant exposure, our bodies also crave diverse foods. And so that means not having, your peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for lunch and, your burger every day for dinner, whatever it is you usually do, but really mixing it up, eating with the seasons, trying lots of different foods, and making sure, of course, that a lot of them are plants.
I think an ideal diet for most guts would be made up of a significant amount of fermentable fiber from a wide variety of vegetables. Examples of those vegetables which I think feed the gut better than any other would be things like leeks, a variety of lettuces. Romaine lettuce is great for the gut. In fact, even iceberg lettuce, which quite often is dismissed as having no nutritional value, when you take a look at the type of fiber found in all lettuces, it's among the best for feeding different organisms in the gut. I think you'd have fermented foods quite often at those same meals. And then root vegetables, things like carrots, beets, parsnips, sweet potatoes, of course. Some of these being a little undercooked or raw at times would give us some of that resistant starch, which would feed a wide variety of microbes, thereby fostering that diversity.
We have a much longer history as a species eating vegetables, eating roots, leaves, berries, that didn't have a lot of starch in them. They had a lot of fiber in them. And so, from my point of view, I want people to have lots and lots of fiber, most of it from vegetables. Are you feeding things to your gut that you can't absorb yourself, so the bacteria get to eat it and then eat each other's byproducts?
Fat's really been demonized. For most of my lifetime, I thought fat was really bad for you. And it turns out that some fat is bad for you, which is mostly processed fats, which are the kind that you find in processed foods. But the fats that I were told were really bad, like saturated fats, it turns out are incredibly beneficial for the brain.
Saturated fats are the fats we want to be eating, and they're the fats that we can find. We find them in coconut oil, we find them in animal fat, which, if the animal has been raised humanely, is a really wonderful source of good fat. The body can process those fats because they're pure. They're just what they are. They haven't had anything done to them. There's been no tampering. I am somebody who believes in butter, hands down. I think the French have got it right. You don't find obese people in France. They eat tons and tons of butter. Butter does not make you fat.
We have it all backwards. We have it all backwards. The whole system, Drew, is based on this model of let's lower cholesterol levels. Let's do whatever it takes to do that. It's ridiculous. We don't have any evidence that lower cholesterol levels produce longevity or a higher quality of health. In fact, we have some evidence to the exact opposite of that. One of the more recent studies that was published in the British Medical Journal showed that people living in England over the age of 60 that had the highest LDL levels, a type of cholesterol that's often referred to as bad cholesterol, they lived the longest and had the highest quality of health.
For one, your cells need fat. All of our cells have a fat wrapper, cell membrane. And your brain is 70% fat. Your cell membrane is 70% saturated fat and cholesterol.
You know, as a neurologist, I actually recommend eating lots of unprocessed fats, including saturated fats, you know, in moderation, but fat is definitely your friend when it comes to the brain.
I've been living with HIV, let's say I tested positive in 1991, so that's 26 years now that I've been aware of being HIV positive. The most specific thing I can observe is that, you know, most of the people who I meet who take the kinds of drugs that I take experience digestive problems. You know, often diarrhea, nausea, other kinds of digestive side effects, and I've never experienced that. I mean, sometimes I feel like the luckiest man in the world, just because, I mean, I have had hundreds of people come up and tell me that I changed their life, that sort of like, you know, reading my book, realizing how easy fermentation was, incorporating fermented foods into their diets has just improved their quality of life. So I just feel like, you know, I'm repeatedly hearing stories like that. What we understand now that has not necessarily always been apparent is that, you know, all of the things that make up our food, all of the plants and all of the animal products that people eat are populated by elaborate communities of microorganisms. And in order to, you know, harness this inevitable life force that's part of all of our food, so that rather than it decomposing our food into a disgusting mess that nobody would ever want to eat, you know, we use it to improve our food in various ways, to make our food more delicious, to make our food more easily digestible.
I love fermented food, so I can have a whole dinner plate full of sauerkraut or kimchi or the fermented beets, fermented carrots. And so by eating fermented foods as part of my meals, I get a vastly larger dose and a more diverse amount of species introduced into my gut.
You know, when you make sauerkraut or kimchi, like, you're never adding bacteria. What you're doing is just creating the conditions where the bacteria that's on all vegetables, on all plants, can proliferate. The most profound benefit of fermented foods, the greatest promise of fermented foods, you know, lies in eating bacteria themselves. The probiotic benefit of eating foods that are rich with diverse communities of bacteria and can help to you know, enrich the genetic environment in our intestines for the bacteria that are in residence there, you know, and generally promote greater biodiversity, which can have all kinds of benefits for us.
For me, with the broth, it's like a reset. So, like, instead of going on like crazy diets, I think one of the things to do is to reset the gut. Then you can start to eat things that you might otherwise have been allergic to. There's so many food allergies in our time now. And part of it is because the food isn't pure anymore. It's not coming from a pure source. But I think part of it is also because there's environmental toxins. There's so many different things that play in. If there was one thing that I would say, like the simplest way to heal yourself would be to just start the day with a cup of bone broth. And if you really wanted to do like a drastic cleanse, you could actually do bone broth for 5 days or up to 2 weeks. It would nourish you, would keep you alive with water and teeth. You would be completely, utterly nourished. But it also, what it does is it gently heals the gut lining so that you can then take in other foods that are a little bit more, maybe a little bit more irritable. You basically are receiving something that's sort of very, not pre-digested, but it is. I mean, it's a really pure, it's going straight in.
Yeah.
And and you're not having to do any chewing, you're not having to do your digestion is saying, oh, yummy, yummy, yummy. You know, it's like, this is like perfect.
Come on, come on, come on, come on! Oh, we're gonna miss the light. Come on! That's it.
Yeah, I think nature is the one of the most important things in my life and in my family's life. First and foremost, I think it's the greatest classroom. I think we learn more about the world and the ways in which we can live within it from looking at the way animals and plants and everything, has their own way in this amazing ecosystem, wherever that may be. I think it's just a way for us to slow down. It's a way for us to appreciate the really important things in life. I think one of the most important things to acquire greater gut diversity is to have an enormous amount of exposure to various aspects of nature. Most of our kids today don't have their hands in the dirt or in soil. Far fewer people grow up on small farms where there was a wide variety of microbes in the environment at all times. We tend to live in a very sterile or sterilized environment, right? Our food supply is highly pasteurized, sterilized. We try to take the microbes out of everything, whether it's with hand washes or with pasteurization. And I think one of the best things we can do is have exposure to a variety of animals, whether that be a household pet like a dog, to have contact with plants and nature as much as possible, and to acquire soil-based organisms, which we know, can have a really profound influence on gut health.
The soil, in a way, is the final frontier. We know so much more about, the stars up there than we know about the soil that, is under our feet all the time.
A lot of people have heard of the hygiene hypothesis, right? And the hygiene hypothesis was basically that children who grow up on farms are much less likely to have allergies and asthma than children who grow up in urban environments. And basically, what the researchers said was, well, this is because it's dirtier on farms, and really there are just more bacteria there. And so some researchers came along and said, okay, let's really measure how many organisms are in an urban apartment and how many are on a farm. And they found actually that the number of bacteria were equal, pretty close to equal. But what was different was the diversity of organisms on the farm were far greater. So there were many more types of organisms on a farm than there were in the urban apartment. And so this is what our bodies really crave.
I really do believe that this paranoia to be super clean, it's something that we need to revisit. And again, I was at the airport, 3-4 days ago in San Francisco. And it was extremely refreshing to see this young family with this toddler that was, just playing on the ground. And mom and dad had no problem whatsoever that not only he was doing this, but when he was sitting to put his, hands in the mouth. And I said, wow, look at this. What you see here, is the product of 2 million years of evolution. And 99.99% of the time, we act like that little baby crawling on the floor and not caring about what to do with my hands after that. That's the way that we evolved. It's the only past 40, 50 years, again, that we've been changing dramatically.
I think of these immune cells that are floating around as being very social, and they want to meet and greet lots of different kinds of organisms all the time and see lots of diversity of food and microbes. And when that happens, it's very balanced and happy. When there are only a few kinds, that's when it starts to see everything as a threat. And then you see things like allergies, asthma, and autoimmune disease.
For my personal lifestyle, I have to be outdoors at some point in the day, even if it's torrential downpour. I mean, we've had a really, really wet summer, and my daughter and I went recently. I go walking with her a lot because she has a dog that needs a lot of exercise. The woods and lakes and rivers are really my church. I used to try to always go for a hike on a Sunday because I'm not a churchgoer, but it is really important for me to sit by a river, just to let myself come to a place of stillness, because I'm a very active, outgoing person. And so to just sit by the river and be still I would say that's my number one.
One of the things that I absolutely love is once people go outside and just stop and experience how they feel, they get it. You don't need a study to prove it. You get it just by being outside.
The ways that we can align ourselves more with a very traditional human life or experience are maybe even more profound than what we eat. Getting out in the sunlight, I think that's incredibly therapeutic, and I think there's a requirement for that for for optimal health. I think you have to have a certain amount of time out in the sun. It goes way beyond vitamin D production. It's all about light therapy, and we don't get enough infrared light, we don't get enough UVB. And so these are things that a lot of people have just lost, right? We don't spend any time in contact with the Earth's surface. Most people run from the sun now, just like they do from saturated fat. You know, so you end up with a long list of problems as we create greater and greater discord between that traditional way of human life and you know, the way we live now.
I sometimes have to multitask my nature into my day because I'm, you know, a busy mom and doctor, so I trail run. And even if it's for a quick run, I'm running through the forest. So I get my exposure to nature, I get my microbes, I get that peaceful feeling, and I'm exercising at the same time. So for me, I like to multitask by just doing whatever I can outdoors, which might mean running outside, and it might mean having my lunch outside. Also, sometimes, like, I'll just take a moment to stand outside when it's sunset, or it's just a beautiful moment in the day, and just take a moment of gratitude. And that, I think, can be very powerful as well.
What I would recommend to sort of, you know, anybody, but particularly anybody raising children, is create opportunities to get your kids outside, you know, in nature, touching plants, getting their hands in the dirt, maybe like playing with some animals. And, you know, we need more bacterial biodiversity. It's sort of how our immune systems learn to function.
I think fear is one of the biggest barriers to a better quality of life and to better health. I think people are afraid of the sun. I think people are afraid of saturated fat. I think people are afraid of getting their hands dirty, you know, putting their hands, you know, in really rich soil that may have, you know, cow manure in it. It may have a wide variety of microbes in it. But once you start living a life of fear, you start to reduce your exposure to all those things that truly nourish us. You know, it's the same way when people start to isolate themselves. They have a fear of strangers, right? They have a fear of communicating with people that they don't know very well. You know, that leads to a whole long list of you know, mental disorders. I think fear is the greatest barrier to people really having the full experience that, you know, I think they should enjoy in life.
Whether it's just about prevention or it's about reversing a condition that someone already has, we have such plastic brains and bodies that all we have to do is give them the tools that they need. And very often, I see really transformational healing.
So these things, like Alzheimer's and heart disease and cancer, are not inevitable consequences of getting older. And if you look at other societies, blue zones, you know, places like Okinawa, Japan, and Sardinia off the coast of Italy, the Icarius, a Greek island. These are parts of the world where people don't experience chronic complex disease in the way that we do.
So I think the joy in life and the joy in eating and the joy in cooking, if that's not there, then we're not going to heal. So in order to heal and in order to move forward as humans in evolution, we have to have joy. And we have to also observe this incredibly beautiful planet that we still have, and be grateful for every single thing, and care for it. Care for our food, care for where it comes from, care for the animals, care for our water sources. It is, if we're not doing that, then no matter of knowledge and information is going to help us.
The more the food pyramid for an ideal lifestyle, at the bottom, the stuff that you have to consume the most, there is no food. There is lifestyle. Play outside. Have fun. Don't take yourself seriously. Grow old together. When you sit for a meal, sit together as a family. These were given activities until 2-3 generations ago. Not anymore. We don't do this anymore. So why we are surprised that we're paying such a price?
We need to become our own doctors, and then when it comes to specialization, or somebody needs an organ transplant, absolutely, The doctors, the surgeons, the hospitals are absolutely incredible when it comes to those things. But we need to learn how to recuperate after surgery. They don't pretend to know how to do that. They want you out of there as quickly as possible. Get home, get back into your environment, go for a walk, go. So we need to learn that all these holistic measures, what we eat, how we exercise, how we enjoy community, how we love our families, all these things are so integral to staying well, to being healthy, and to furthering the evolution of the planet.
I'd love to tell you a story about a woman that I worked with. She came in to me after a lecture on heart disease, and she walked in and said, "I am a heart attack waiting to happen." And her story went like this. She had just had her third medicine added for blood pressure that was spiraling out of control. She was on an acid-blocking medication for her terrible reflux. She'd gained 30 pounds. She was stress eating because part of her day-to-day was taking care of her husband who had chronic lung disease, and it was just spiraling out of control. We didn't put her on any specific program, but we talked about the importance of her taking care of herself and eating a whole foods diet and getting some movement. I didn't hear back from her for 9 months. When she came back in, I didn't recognize her. She had lost 30 pounds. I said, "Wow, what did you do with your diet?" She says, "Well, I just quit the stress eating and the processed foods, and I'm mostly eating protein and vegetables." I said, "Okay. What are you doing for your exercise?" "Well, I'm not going to a gym or anything. I just practice running up the stairs to see how fast I can go every day." But I think one of the most important things she did is she hired a young girl to come in twice a week and take care of her husband. So she was now free to go back and have lunch with her friends and get out and do things and re-engage. And here was what was beautiful about that. She was off of all of her blood pressure medicines except one that was on a minimal dose. She had stopped her acid-blocking medicine. She had stopped her antidepressant. She had stopped her sleeping pill. She had stopped her anti-inflammatories for her joints. And she had a joy that was basically, I am so excited for the next chapter and what I'm going to do tomorrow.
You know, I had these two twin boys who came to see me who were having staring spells. They were having absence seizures. And it turned out that each of them only ate about 4 foods. They were really limited and they were only eating very processed foods. And basically, we got these kids onto a whole foods diet, meaning very unprocessed, and they were eating much more diverse foods, lots more fruits and vegetables, and some, it took a little time to get there. But by getting them on a whole foods diet, eating more fermented foods, and actually descheduling their day a little bit so they had more time to just play outdoors in the afternoon, they stopped having seizures without being on any medications. And I monitored them for 2 years after that, and basically we saw a total reversal in their condition simply by making some very significant changes in the way they were living.
So there's a fellow, a vet, who had an injury to his leg and a traumatic amputation to his leg. And he had a profound neuropathic pain, phantom limb pain. He had become an alcoholic. He'd gotten over his alcoholism, had a wife, but his pain was getting more and more severe. He'd been to the pain clinic multiple times, had multiple procedures. They just could not get control of the pain. He'd been in and out of the ER. And the pain clinic finally said, there's nothing more I can do for you, but I want you to go to the see Dr. Wahls, the therapeutic lifestyle clinic. And he went home and said, I got nothing to lose. So he and his wife adopted our protocol 100%. And he came back in 6 months. In 6 weeks, said, things are a little bit better. And then he came back again. So in 3 months, his pain still there, but markedly reduced. His mental clarity markedly improved. And he's telling the newbies to the group, you got to do this. I got a Vitamix. We're making smoothies. I have green smoothies every day so I can get all those vegetables in. And so he became a poster child for the fact that no matter how desperate things are, that give it a try. 100% for 100 days. He transformed his life.
And anyone who thinks that their doctor is the answer to their health or that the hospitals in their communities are the answers to their health is missing a huge opportunity to take greater control of their lives. We know that 75-80% of all chronic disease can be traced to lifestyle. And healthy living doesn't happen in doctors' offices. Healthy living doesn't happen in hospitals. Healthy living, and the road to healthy living, is paved by the choices we make each and every moment.
So, I believe that the kitchen needs to be a place where there's laughter and joy and fun. And I think the people with special needs benefit from the food they're eating, but they benefit from being part of that they don't just get sat down at a table and the food comes in on a tray. But they've been part of, harvesting and bringing it in and cleaning it and then cooking it and then eating it. And those who can express that verbally have expressed to me many, many times how much that means to them. So for me, I never get tired of that. And I just feel like if that's all I did from now until I died, that would be great. Just teaching people to nourish themselves. I just hope that people watching will get inspired to get back in the kitchen and not see it as going backwards, especially for women. We can do it all. We can work and we can be in the kitchen, and it doesn't have to be the women in the kitchen. It can be the men in the kitchen, the kids in the kitchen, and we can do it together. We can have parties where we all cook together, and so I think it's the only way to really preserve sort of a healing step forward.
That's Teddy. That's Teddy the donkey. Just pitching in. I think he's saying joy is important. Let's stop in a minute. That's a long one. You'll have to get a shot of Teddy on the way out.